Okay, so Yachiramo, greetings, Yedase, everyone, for tuning into this special live stream. For those who are unaware, I am Odwirafo, Kwesi Ranehmbata, Akan Odwirafo of Alpamuman, Amaruka Tifimu, the Alpamu Nation in North America, within Ojiraman, the purified nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, African Black people in the Western Hemisphere. So we just wanted to introduce some detailed information about cosmology, culture, ancestral religion, spiritual cultivation in the context of the actual Abosom deities that govern the so-called Zodiac. So we published this article on our Ojirasem site a while back called AKYENEBOA, Sacred Animal Totems, Original Zodiac Signs. So first and foremost, AKYENEBOA is an Akan term. Akan people are majority population in Ghana and Ivory Coast in West Afuraitkaitnit. We use Akan terms because we are Akan first and foremost, but also because Akan people, like others, migrated from ancient Khanit and Kamit, Nubia and Egypt, to the western part of the continent, continued the culture and so forth. And some of us were taken from the western part of the continent, from the Akan population, and forced into the Western Hemisphere during the Musuo Kessie, the Great Perversity, the enslavement era. And therefore, we carried that Akan ancestral religion with us. In North America, that tradition is called the Hoodoo tradition, which is Akan ancestral religion. In Jamaica, it's called Obia. In Suriname, it's called Winti. In Guyana, it's called Komfa and so forth. But we practice the same tradition, invoke the same divinities, deal with the same AKYENEBOA animal totems. And as we show in our many books and, broadcasts, classes, and so forth, we published 31 books to date. We have 35 online courses. Actually, now it's 36 and 37, including the ones that are ongoing and so forth. And we've dealt with this information, linguistic, cultural, cosmological, and so forth. So we can utilize these terms and show the Akan language, the terms from ancient Khanit and Kamit, still in use in the Akan language today. So the term AKYENEBOA means animal totems, animal signs or totems and so forth. Let's switch down, make sure we can get everybody in here. Okay. And first we wanted to show that these signs from the so-called Zodiac, whether it's tropical Zodiac or the sidereal Zodiac and so forth, that people made popular, these ancient animal totems that are representatives or shrines in the animal realm for the specific deities, male and female divinities. The key is that these are deities and they have sacred animal totems, plant totems, animal totems, mineral totems, and of course, Afuraitkaitnit or African Black human totems for the different divinities. You have the Great Mother and Great Father Supreme Being, who in ancient Khanit and Kamit are called Amen and Amenet, the Great Mother and Great Father Supreme Being. Then you have the various deities, the forces in nature that govern all aspects of creation, who are the children of the Great Being and so forth. And then you have plant life, animal life, mineral life, and Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit or African Black human life. There are plant totems, plants that carry the energy of different divinities. They are shrines for specific divinities. Some plants are fiery, some are cool and so forth, and various energetic temperaments and so forth. You have plant totems that are associated with the different divinities. You have animal totems that are associated with different divinities. You have mineral totems that are associated with different divinities. And of course, within the Black population only around the world, Afuraitkaitnit people, African Black people, we are totems or children of specific divinities. So in all aspects of creation, there are totemic forms that carry the energy of the specific forces in creation. Animal totems are just one of those totemic forms that exist. Now, when we talk about the Zodiac, and we're going to get into each one of these and give a brief overview of each one. When you look at the signs of the quote unquote Zodiac, these were taken and corrupted from ancient Khanit and Kamit into, by the Greeks and Romans and others and so forth, into the signs that we know about today. We want to take it back to the original. Now, but first, before we get into that, I'm going to go out of this page first. I want to pull up a document for you. And I'm going to show a couple of images just to give you a little bit of background. All right. One second, it's just taking a minute to come up. Okay. So what you see here is a replication of the circular zodiac, the first, image of a zodiac, circular zodiac from the temple of Het-Heru in Dendera in the central, near southern part of Kamit. This is a replication of that. It was originally on the ceiling of the temple of Het-Heru in Dendera. Europeans removed it. There is now a replication of that in the ceiling in that particular temple. And when we visit Kamit and we visit the temple of Het-Heru in Dendera, you'll see that replication of this circular zodiac. And you'll see that the male and female divinities surrounding the circle, it represents the heavens and so forth. These various human and animal figures are divinities. They are totemic forms, human totems and animal totems for the various deities that govern the zodiac. Now, they will talk about that being the ancient structural form. Now, we're going to pull up, we're going to go to another document. That was created during the late period in Kamit by the time the Greeks invaded and so forth. But that ancient circular form of a zodiac that represents the positions of the planets, suns, moons, stars, and equinoxes and solstices and so forth, that wasn't the first time you had a circular representation of the heavens. Now we go to Nabta Playa. This is an image of the circular calendar of Nabta Playa, near the Nubian border and so forth, near Nubit, the ancient title for Nubia and so forth, now called Sudan. Okay, go back down. Now, Nabta Playa was once a large internally drained basin in the Nubian desert, about 800 kilometers south of modern day Cairo. So we're going to look at where Nabta Playa is. When you look at a map of Kamit, so this is Kamit, and then you get to the border at the bottom. This border is the border between Kamit, quote unquote, Egypt, and Sudan, and Nubia, and so forth. And then you'll see Nabta Playa down here. You'll see Abosom right here. So Abosom, where the great temple. Hold on a second. All right. Abosom is where the great temple of Ramesu II and Nefertari, the Queen Mother Nefertari, misnomered Ramses II, but Ra-Mesu II, and Nefertari. They have a great temple in Abosom that was a region of ancient Khanit or Nubia at the time. Now it's been included in the protectorate of Aswan, Swini, or Aswan and so forth. So it's considered southern Kamit. In previous times, the border had shifted. That was part of ancient Khanit or Nubia, and it's really still part of Nubia in the real sense now. You'll see Abosom right here. You'll see Lake Nubia right here, the Wadi Halfa and so forth. And this is the borderline. This is the modern borderline between Sudan and Kamit. But in ancient times, this region of Nabta Playa is part of ancient Khanit, ancient Sudan, ancient Nubia or Nubi. Now, there's a couple of things. They'll talk about the early history and so forth, talking about tens of thousands of years ago. What's important is archaeological findings may indicate human occupation in the region dating to at least somewhere around the 10th and 8th millennium BC. They're talking about 12,000 years ago. Are people already there? And really before that, but they're talking about 12,000 years ago. And what's important about the site, they talk about a number of different things, but by the 6th millennium BCE, evidence of a prehistoric, so that's going back 8,000 years ago, evidence of a prehistoric religion or cult appears from 5500 BC, the late Neolithic period began, a new group that had a complex social system, so they started talking about that. These people were responsible for sacrificial cattle burials in clay-lined and roofed chambers covered by rough stone tumuli. And they will also show some of the pottery and so forth that was going back, 8,000 plus years ago in the region. It has been suggested that the associated cattle cult indicated in Nabta Playa, ancient Nubit or Nubia, marks an early evolution of ancient Kemet's Het Heru cult. For example, Het Heru was worshipped as a nighttime protector in desert regions. And you'll see Serabit El Kadim, to directly quote the professors, there are many aspects of political and ceremonial life in prehistoric Kemet and the Old Kingdom that reflects a strong impact from Saharan cattle pastoralists. And what's important for this particular discussion, they fashion what may be, they'll say maybe, but what it actually is. The earliest known archaeoastronomical devices. And when they talk about Stonehenge and everything else, predates that by thousands of years. Now, these include alignments of stones that may have indicated the rising of certain stars and a calendar circle that indicates the approximate direction of the summer solstice sunrise. Calendar circle, they'll say misnomer and so forth. But in reality, when they talk about this ancient structure, this is an ancient calendar structure. They have the solstices, equinoxes, and the important stars dealing with navigation. But at the same time, they had already developed, they had burials that were clay-lined burials. They were burying cattle and so forth, mummified cattle, burying cattle, stone structures underground, lined with clay, with stone tumuli and so forth, decorating the graves and so forth. This was an ancient cult dealing with Het Heru, as well as the male divinity, Men. Men and Het Heru. Men was the great bull. Het Heru is the great cow in their animal totemic forms. And they deal with creativity, fertility, the perpetuation of the creation of the universe. Old sacred divinities, formative divinities, also within the body, as we're going to see. So this ancient circular calendar circle is the origin of that circular zodiac of Dendera. Later on, these stones will be represented because they're positioned dealing with the planets and specific stars. Later on, those stones will be represented by deities. animal and human totemic forms of deities. So this circular structure will later be represented as this particular structure as we saw. This is the latent version of that original structure. When those people in ancient Nubia, ancient Khanit, set up that structure, and even today, those same stone structures point to specific stars as they rise and set and so forth, as well as the solstice, and therefore they can calculate where the winter solstice and the equinoxes are and so forth. This is the original piece. Now, let's go out of here real quick. And we're going to go to our, before we get to the chart, just want to show one particular article in a book that we published. So in our yearly conference that we have in June around the summer solstice, the Ojiraman conference dealing with nationism, nation building, restoration, rooted in our ancestral religious values. We published a journal for the first 3 conferences. And we were talking about what we call the per Ankh Nut, the different positions of the sun and so forth. And it's a cosmogram similar to the Bakongo cosmogram and so forth that represents all aspects of creation. And for those who are unaware, so this is one of the books we published. We talked about, this is Amenet, the Great Mother. This is Amen, the Great Father. Amen and Amenet have always been 2 halves of the great divine whole that we call the Supreme Being. In Akan, that's Inyamewa and Inyame. In Yoruba, that's Olokun and Olorun. In Vodun, that's Mawu and Lisa and so forth. Great Mother and Great Father, Supreme Being. But what we show in this particular piece is that the Nut symbol from ancient Kamit that represents a nation, a polity, a political entity, and so forth, is a replication of the circular zodiac of Dendera. Within that circle, all possibilities take place. Within that circle, the luminaries that govern all aspects of our life on Earth and so forth, all that potential happens and so forth. The Nut symbol in ancient Kamit represents that, but then we show that there are different Nut symbols across cultures. So once again, this is the original Zodiac. This is the actual, photo of that from the Temple of Het Heru in Dendera. And once again, that's in the Temple of Het Heru, which is important because you go all the way back, that's like 300 BCE. You go all the way back to 8,000, 10,000 years ago in Nabta Playa. And they have this circular zodiac as well. And they have the burials for the cattle, the sacred Ka, bull, the sacred Ka'et, cow of Het Heru, as well as men and so forth. And then this temple of Het Heru has the zodiac as well. So Het Heru, in this context, dealing with the desert, the Western land, the land of the setting sun, when the sun sets and you see the stars and so forth, this is what we're talking about. And we're going to pull up another representation of that. But so the Nut symbol, then we show the people of the Congo. They have the Dikenga Dia Congo, which is the cosmogram of the Congo people, the 4 positions of the sun. Everything within the universe takes place within that sacred cycle of the sun that governs the day, governs the year, and all human possibility and so forth. In the Akan tradition, you have the Abine symbol that represents government. This is from the Akan Adinkra symbols, but you also have the Okra Konmuadie. This is what this Adinkra symbol is. It represents the Okra, the soul, the divine consciousness and so forth, and how you self-govern yourself, the soul, the divinity that governs your head and so forth. That's a Nut symbol as well. So this is from ancient Kamit. This is from the people of the Congo. These two symbols are from the Akan people of Ghana and Ivory Coast. And then you have the Oponifa, the divination tray. Let's just go back up a little bit. The divination tray of the Yoruba people. And when divination is performed on the divination tray, they would divide it into quadrants, and any possibility of anything taking place within creation can be read within those quadrants. This is an ancient newt symbol in the Yoruba tradition. We were showing that in the Akan tradition, we have this Okra Komuadie, this Adinkra symbol representing the soul, the divine consciousness, and self-governance. What governs all aspects of creation, all aspects of life, is the soul, the Kra, which is called Kra Akan. This is a golden representation of that. So that's a newt symbol as well. Any possibility that can happen within creation, you can read within this structural symbol. It is the same symbol from ancient Kamit in the Akan tradition. You have the same symbol in its, in a different way in the Yoruba tradition as well. And once again, this is another Akan symbol, Abain, which means government, that which governs all aspects of creativity and life and functioning. And of course, in the Bakongo tradition, the Dikinga, Diakongo, the four positions of the sun and so forth, all possibilities take place within that sacred cycle. And wherever you are within the cycle, or plant life, animal life, mineral life, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, human life, social interactions between peoples, villages, nations, and so forth, all take place within that symbol. And it is utilized for divination. All these symbols are utilized for divination in the various cultures. But it goes back to this newt symbol. And we show that to show that that same symbol actually derives from the original newt symbol, represented by the circular zodiac and all the deities that govern all natural cycles in creation, represented in that circular form, that infinite circular form. And we continue to utilize that circular form in our ritual practices, no matter where we migrated on Earth. We migrated to the Congo, we migrated to the regions of today's Ghana and Ivory Coast, migrated to the region of today's Nigeria and so forth. We continually use these symbols to deal with divination, to find out any aspect of creation, what's going on, what circumstances are undergirded by what divinities, and how to align ourselves with divine order based on what's happening at any point in time within that sacred circle or cycle. But it all goes back to the original circular structure, circular cycle over 10,000 plus years ago to Naptaplai. And these stones later on are represented by the divinities that govern those different positions. So they're shown as, in various plant, animal, and human totemic forms as divinities. Now, second. All right. Now let's get to our article. So we know about the various symbols that are used today. We want to give the original symbols, the original animal totems, and the deities that govern them. They govern different aspects of creation. They have shrines within our physical bodies. Your different organs and organ systems are shrines, centers of resonance for these different deities. And this applies to Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, African Black people exclusively. These divinities do not communicate with the whites and their offspring, white Europeans or Asians or white Americans or white Hindus or Arabs and pseudo-Native Americans and so forth. Only Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, African Black people can communicate with, be possessed by, and engage with divinatory practices with the forces in nature. Now we're going to get into why that's the case. But when you look at this just to go through them quickly, and then we're going to go on detail. Ba-Neb-Jedet, the great Ba, meaning ram, Neb, Jedet, master, Neb of Jedet, the Jed pillar, that flat-horned ram divinity, was later called the Ram Aries. You have the great bull divinity, who's Ptah and men functioning through the same vessel and so forth. That bull divinity is later corrupted into Tor. Can you hear now? I just want to make sure. Zoom had a little problem. Even logging in today was taking a minute for Zoom to allow us to log in. So just let me know in the chat room if you can hear. Okay, so it may be spotty today, but we'll get through it. 1 second, I just want to. Okay, so we were talking about Ptah men represented, corrupted into Taurus, Shu and Tefnut, the male and female divinities, Shu and Tefnut, later corrupted into 2 male twins called Castor and Pollux and so forth, which is misinformation. Kepra, the beetle divinity that pushes the ball of dung, as well as the great solar disk across the sky with its hind legs pushing backwards, later transformed into the crab that walks backwards and so forth. We have the Shesep and Ankh, misnomer, the Sphinx and so forth, represented by Herubedeti, lion, body of a lion, head of a male and so forth. But sometimes you'll have the full body of a lion and the head of a lion with the crown and so forth for Herubedeti or Herubehudet, Herubefu and so forth, corrupted into Leo. Of course, Set, the great virgin and so forth, corrupted into Virgo. The female divinity Ma'at, governing the scales of Ma'at on the feminine side. There's a male divinity named Ma'ah, who governs the scales of balance and so forth, divine law and balance and so forth on the masculine side. But Ma'at, they later took and corrupted into Libra, dealing with the scales. You have the female divinity Serket, the scorpion goddess, later corrupted into Scorpio. Now you have Sekhmet, the serpent bearer, warrioress and so forth. And she's called the serpent bearer. She's a divine killer, but a divine healer and so forth. And that was later corrupted into Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer. And then we have Neat, the great mother Neat, one of the great mother divinities. She's sometimes shown as with the weaving shuttle. She's the divine weaver of ethereal matter, but she's also an archeress. And as an archeress and so forth, she was corrupted into Athena by the Greeks and so forth, but she was called Sagittarius, the archeress and so forth, or the archer, corrupted into a male divinity. You have Kunwemu, misnomer Kunum, originally the flat-horned ram of the south, Kunum or Kunim, later corrupted into Capricorn and transformed by the whites into a goat. And that's important because that's the great ram of the south, Kunwemu. However, the great ram of the north is Ba-Neb-Jedet, and the whites called that divinity later the goat of Mendes. They corrupted Jedet into Mendes, and they started calling the great ram of Mendes or Jedet or Jejedu, they started calling him the goat of Mendes. But they did the same thing with the divinity Kunwemu. He was the great ram of the south and so forth, fertile divinity, dealing with releasing the flood waters of Hapi. He held the bolts to the door that broke open the door, and then the flood waters of the river Hapi, misnomer, Nile, would flood forward and so forth. That's why they show him as a he-goat and so forth, or a swimming, she-goat and so forth, he-goat or she-goat and so forth. You also have Hapi and Merit. Hapi is the male force that animates the Nile River. And then you have Merit, who is the female force who animates the Nile River. There's a Hapi of the south and a Hapi of the north. There's a Merit of the south and Merit of the north. Hapi, the water bearer that pours from his vase or set of vases, water that fills up the Nile River and makes it overflow and so forth and flood and inundate, was corrupted into Aquarius and so forth. That's what took place. And then you also have the male and female fish divinities, Anit and Remi. These are the pilot fish. They're shown in human totemic forms or fish forms and so forth. These are the pilot fish, two pilot fish that follow and guide the boat of Ra when he's sailing through the sky and the solar disk is in that boat. The two pilot fish of the boat of Ra are Anit and Remi, and that was later corrupted into Pisces. Now, so let's get into the article, and then we're going to get into some details about a number of these divinities. Hold on a second, let me make sure all right. So, we're talking about the signs of the zodiac. They didn't originate in Babylon and so forth. The reason we talked about Nabta Playa in the beginning is to show that we were already had that circular form of the zodiac, the sacred calendar dealing with the celestial bodies that governed every aspect of existence and so forth. We were already engaged in the burial of the sacred Ka and Kayat, the bull and the cow and so forth. We were already engaged in ancestral religion and so forth. So we already had these practices. We carried them north throughout Kamit, from Khanit, Nubia, to Kamit, so-called Egypt, and into the Near East. Of course, our people settled so-called Kanana, later misnomer Canaan, settled so-called Kangi, later called Sumer, later called the Akkadian Empire and so forth. We established culture. We brought culture with us, brought our ancestral religion with us, of course. We're living in harmony with nature. So the zodiac did not begin with the Babylonians. It didn't begin with the Greeks. It didn't begin with anybody outside of our people. We established that just like we established all of civilization. Now, so we wrote an article about Sekhmet and Imhotep, origin of Ophiuchus the 13th zodiac sign and so forth, because they were talking about the differences between the tropical zodiac and the astronomical zodiac. We give the different dates in this particular article. We just showed these different deities and their names and the original names and so forth. If you look at the different dates, the sun enters the constellation of Neat on December 18th. The sun enters the constellation of Kunem on January 19th. The sun enters the constellation of Hapi and Merit, so-called Aquarius, on February 16th, meaning when you look in the sky, this is where, this is what's taking place. It's not simply the sky divided into 12 equal parts, as you see with regard to, what the Greeks were doing and so forth. And they were copying from the civil calendar of Kamit with 12 months of 30 days, plus the intercalary day of 5 days or epigomenal days and so forth. That made 365 days. That was a seasonal calendar. Of course, we had a seasonal calendar, but just like here, you have a seasonal calendar, but then you also will look at the phases of the moon, and that doesn't fit with the 12 months of the quote unquote Gregorian year. But those are two separate things that people look at. They'll look at the regular Gregorian calendar, January through, December, 30 days, 31 days each month, except for February, which is 28. But then people also pay attention to when there's a new moon, when there's a full moon and so forth, and the different phases in between. We've always done that. that ancient seasonal or civil calendar in Kamit with 12 months of 30 days, and then one set of epigomenal days, 5 days, the intercalary days, which makes 365 days a year. We've already dealt with that. In fact, let me just pull that up real quick just so you can see a representation of that as we're talking about it. If you look at the Coptic calendar today, that is in use in Kamit today, it is derived and is a continuation of the ancient calendar from Kamit. So what you'll see is the Coptic calendar dates in the various Coptic, dialects, Bohairic, Sahidic, and so forth. They'll say Taut in Coptic today. That's a corruption of Tahut or Tahuti and so forth. The first day of the Coptic calendar, the Kameti calendar, is the day 1 of the month of Tahuti. The month of Tahuti, the first day of the month of Tahuti is the beginning of the year. If you translate that into the Gregorian calendar dates, then the first day of the first month of the Kameti year in Gregorian calendar dates, that's September 11th. And our calendar is Tahuti 1, the first day of the first month. The month is called Tahuti. Then you have Pa Apet, the Apet festival. That's the second month of the year. It begins on what the Gregorian calendar date would say is October 11th, but we would say that's Opet or Patan Apet 1. And then the month of Heteru, the first day of the month of Heteru is actually November 10th. And as you go down, you'll see that there are 12 months of 30 days each. And then the 13th month, which will be translated into the Gregorian calendar dates of September 6th through the 10th. That is the quote unquote little month and so forth. So together that's 365 days. This goes back over 5,000 years ago. So we've been using that calendar, but we also had a lunar calendar where we watched the phases of the moon, going from new moon to full back to new moon. There are sacred ceremonies and processions of the deity Min on the new moon and so forth. And the cult statues, ritual statues are taken out. There's a union of men and Heteru, and there are a number of different things dealing with the new moon and the full moon and so forth. We have lunar male and female lunar divinities, spiritual forces that animate the moon. So we had the lunar calendar as well. We had this civil calendar, but we also understood that there's, we have the ancient Kameti calendar with 3 weeks of 10 days each and so forth, specific to the quote unquote Hapi Valley. Now, so when you look at the actual dates that the sun enters these constellations, for example, they would say that we are in Aquarius right now. Aquarius is actually Hapi, the water bearer, and that doesn't begin until February 16th. Meaning if you look in the sky right now, the sun is not in Aquarius. You look in the sky on February 16th, that's when it enters the constellation of Aquarius. And when you look at these various dates, you will see that there are actually 13 constellations that cross the ecliptic at this point. A couple of thousand years ago, there were only 12 constellations that crossed the ecliptic, but because of the precession of the equinoxes and so forth, now there are 13 constellations that cross the ecliptic. That's where there are quote unquote 13 months. One of them, for example, November 23rd through November 29th, 7 days, the sun enters this constellation of Serket, which is the scorpion goddess, misnomer Scorpio or Scorpius and so forth. That only lasts for 7 days, and then the sun moves into the constellation of Sekhmet, or quote unquote Ophiuchus. So some of the months, one is 7 days, one is 25 days, one is 32 days, one is 28 days, and so forth. There are differing times. They're not all 30 days. It's based on when the sun moves into a specific position. But to go a little bit further, just for a cosmological context, we say that what is termed the zodiac, the signs of the zodiac, and its implications for Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, Africans, Black people, has been misrepresented by the whites and their offspring. What we're talking about here, the Abosom, that's the term for deities, the divine spirit forces animating creation, utilize various features of creation as shrines. Shrines magnify the energy of the Abosom, that's the Akan term for deities. Orisha is the Yoruba term for deities. Vodou is the Evian phone term for deities. Arusi is the term for deities in Igbo. Nsoru and Nsorotu, or Neteru, Netutu are the term for deities in ancient Kamit, and so forth. Just like you can use a magnifying glass to intensify some energy, use a magnifying glass and intensify some energy and cause some dry leaves under the magnifying glass to combust. The output of the sun has not changed. If the sun is just shining on some dry leaves on the ground, they're just warm. If you put a magnifying glass in between the sun and those leaves, and then that energy is particularized or pinpointed or focused and so forth, then you can cause a combustion, because that magnifying device simply magnified the energetic output of the sun at a specific point. In the same fashion, the shrines that we establish for deities, for ancestral spirits and so forth, they are magnifying devices. When we establish a shrine for Het Heru, a shrine for the Abosom Awusi, a shrine for the Abosom Afia, a shrine for the Abosom Benar Abenani Akan tradition, or a shrine for Obatala, a shrine for Yemoja, and so forth, those are magnifying devices. They optimize the energy or magnify the energy of the Abosom, the Orisha, the Vodou at that space, so we can fully invest ourselves with that energy. So, and communicate with that divinity through spirit possession and spirit communication. So that's what we're saying in this portion of the article. Just like when you see spirit possession take place within Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, whether on the continent or here in North America or anywhere we exist, the spirit gets inside the body and moves within the person and speaks through the person. And we always use the example of if you were in a car and you were driving and you stopped and allowed your friend to get in the car and they took the wheel and you got in the back seat. Now there are two individuals in the vessel and the friend is now in control of the direction of the vessel. That's what happens when ancestral possession takes place. That's what happens when deity possession takes place. The spirit gets in your vessel. You take the background, the spirit takes the foreground, operates through the physical vehicle to communicate with the community, to lay hands or heal the community, to show how to pick or procure medicine from plant life or mineral life and so forth, to teach, to admonish, to guide, to warn, and then the spirit leaves the body and you take back the foreground, just like the person getting out of your car, and you get out the back seat and get in the front seat, and now you're in control of the vehicle. Now it's only one person in the vehicle. There were two people in the vessel, the vehicle, now there's just one. There are two entities in the vessel, your spirit as well as the spirit of the deity, the Abosom, the Orisha, the Vodou, or the Nsamanfo, the ancestral spirit, and yourself. But then once the spirit leaves, spirit possession is over, now you're back to yourself. Just like the spirits of the deities and ancestral spirits possess our people, they will also possess plant life, mineral life, animal life, and those become the totems, plant totems, animal totems, mineral totems, and of course, we are the human totems of the deities. When they possess the sun and use the sun to transmit their energy, then that sun is a totem, a mineral totem. The celestial bodies are mineral totems for the deities. So Ra and Ra'et will possess the sun. Asar and Aset will possess the moon and so forth. So when we look at these different constellations, a configuration of stars, just by virtue of the fact that you can see the starlight, the energy from these entities impacting you, a collection of stars and a collection of energetic projections in a specific geometric pattern reveals a collection or configuration of energy that's unique to that pattern, and it carries the energy of a specific divinity. So they possess that configuration and transmit their energy through that configuration. So when you're talking about constellations, if you're talking about signs or constellations, if you're not communicating with the spiritual force, the deity that governs that constellation or possesses that constellation or utilizes that configuration of energy to project through, then you're not dealing with astrology. Just memorizing signs and times and so forth, and then making predictions and so forth. The Greeks, Romans, Arabs, others, Hindus and so forth, Asians, imitated what they learned from our people, repeated certain things and corrupted most and so forth, but they're not capable of communicating with the divinities. So for example, we talk about, we're about to get into some basic information on each one of these divinities. When you talk about Shu and Tefnut, these are two forces in creation. When you can be possessed by Shu and Tefnut and communicate directly with them, you have a relationship with them. When they possess you during spirit possession, spirit communication, coming to your shrine and so forth, because you're a child of Shu or you're a child of Tefnut and so forth, you have a relationship with that Abosom, with these Abosom, with these Orisha, with these Vodou. If you don't have a relationship with them, then you start talking about Gemini and what Gemini represents, and somebody's a Gemini because they do certain things and so forth, you don't know what you're talking about. If you can't communicate with Shu and Tefnut, then you don't know anything about quote unquote Gemini. If you can't communicate with Kepra, the divinity that animates and shows that beetle totem, there's Kepra and Kepri, the male and female beetle, which is a male and female force. If you can't communicate with those divinities, you don't know anything about quote unquote Cancer. If you can't communicate with the deity Banabjeret, the great ram divinity is a sacred animal totem, but he's a force in creation. If you can't communicate with him, he's called Tetek Kwaframwa in Akan, that Abosom Tetek Kwaframwa. If you don't know, hold on a second. If you can't communicate with Tetek Kwaframwa, then you don't know anything about quote unquote Aries. So let's get into some information about who these divinities are. Let's start off, for example, let's start off with the river divinity Hapi. We just said that some people are saying, well, we're in Aquarius right now. We just showed on the chart that Aquarius begins on February 16th. That's when the sun moves into the constellation of Aquarius. It's governed by Hapi and Merit. So let's look at some information to give you an idea of what we're talking about. Okay. Now, this is one of our publications. We share some of this information and more. We actually have a retreat in February, in mid-February, right after mid-February, called the Hapi Merit Retreat on Edisto Island in South Carolina. Some of you have seen that. But this is Hapi, the male divinity Hapi. This is the female divinity Merit. Now, if you've been hearing about people talk about ancient Kamit and going back and forth to Kamit and teaching and priests and priestesses and everything else, and they talked about the male divinity Hapi, but they've never talked about the female divinity of the river Merit, and she's all over ancient Kamit. This is just one of her many representations in ancient Kamit. Then you're missing half of the process. And very often what our people do is repeat whatever the whites and offspring say. And if the whites and their offspring don't talk about Merit and they only talk about the male deity Hapi, then we just talk about the male deity Hapi and repeat what we've said and put a little, cultural flair on what Europeans said, and that's it. We can find all these divinities in our Khan tradition, as Abosom, as deities in the Orisha tradition, the various traditions. We work directly with them. They're not just images on stones. So of course, that's the river, talking about the inundation of the river, but Merit, goddess of the inundation, but there are two. There's Merit of the north and Merit of the south. They are twin divinities. That's why it's Merti, Merit Met, the female force of the river of the north, and Merit Shema, the female divinity of the south. And you see them side by side. When we go into the temple of Seti and Abju in Kamit, so-called temple of Seti and Abydos, but Abju is the original name and so forth, you will see images, and we've taken pictures of that when we were in Kamit this last May, and we will be touring Kamit once again this spring and so forth. You will see the images of Merit of the south and Merit of the north. This is just one manifestation of them standing side by side. But that's important because when you look at the male divinity Hapi, it's not just one Hapi. Hapi is a twin divinity as well. This is Hapi of the south, Hap Reset. This is Hapi of the north, Hap Met. Now, so you see Hapi, the river Nile, the Nile flood and so forth. He's the one that pours the vase, that causes the river to flood. This is why they say Aquarius is the water bearer, and he has a vase and he pours the water into the river Styx and so forth, that is stolen from this divinity. Now, but again, he's a twin divinity, Hapi of the south, Hapi of the north, two divinities. Married to Merit of the south and Merit of the north, husbands and wives. But when we look in the body, the shrine for Hapi are the arteries, and the shrine for Merit are the veins. The arteries send the blood out to carry the nutrients all throughout the system, and then the veins carry the deoxygenated blood back to the right side of the heart and so forth. And once that deoxygenated blood gets back into the heart-lung complex, it's purified by the oxygen through the lungs and so forth, sent back into the heart, to the left side of the heart to be sent out, so that whole circular process can go once again. So Hapi sends the blood out, Merit carries the blood back. And this is why you see Merit, they'll say she's the one who makes merry. So Hapi is the origin of the English word happy. Merit is the origin of the term merry, like in M-E-R-R-I, Mary makes merriment and so forth. She has a basket. She takes the harvest and so forth. She has to do with the songs and so forth. She carries everything back. She carries the harvest back. And the blood is sent out and goes all throughout the body, and then it's carried back home to the heart and so forth. She's the one with the vessel carrying it back because she governs the veins. He governs the arteries. The arteries are a little bit thicker than the veins and so forth, a little bit more robust and so forth. That's the masculine, that's the feminine. So you have Hapi on earth, and then you of course have Hap, or the great Hap, the great river of stars in the sky. And of course, that's just another representation, but and then we give the linguistic information dealing with that. But what's important is you have the superior and inferior vena cava and so forth. You have the arteries and veins above the heart, and the arteries and veins below the heart. And by the way, so when you have the arteries and veins above the heart, arteries and veins below the heart, you have Hapi of the north, Merit of the north, Hapi of the south, Merit of the south. So they have shrines within our bodies. When we engage in ritual invocation, ritual song, ritual dance, ritual, meditation and so forth, ritual chant, invoke these spirits, and spirit possession happens and so forth. We communicate directly with them, but they also, they have shrines within our bodies, and these are the arteries and veins. Now you look at Hapi as the river, but Hap or Hapu or Hep also means inspector of laws, establisher of laws, good law, justice, to bind, to regulate. Laws, regulations, restrictions, and so forth. So the blood carries the nutrients that regulates harmony throughout the entire system. The blood carries nutrients, but it also carries oxygen that carries the fire and the life force energy, to vitalize us. And we also mentioned in this particular text, we mentioned the long hymn to the deity Hapi, but we mentioned in this particular text that the 42, and of course in Kamit, the south was the top and the north was the bottom. The 42 Sepatu were so-called nomes of Kamit, plus the capital, making 43 divisions of the country, just like there are 50 states in America, plus the District of Columbia, which is the capital. There were 42 Sepat, or so-called nomes, but Sepat, 42 administrative divisions, plus the capital of the country, which makes 43. This is why you have 42 deities who are assessors of Ma'at, plus the judge, which is Al-Sar, and so forth. The reason why the country was divided up into 42, quote unquote, states or nomes or, Sepatu. The deity Sepa is the centipede divinity, but Sep is also the word for nomes or state or administrative division. And when you look at the centipede divinity, when you look at the body, when you look at your body, there are 43 pairs of nerves that regulate your entire body. Kamit was divided up into 42 states plus the capital, which makes 43, that regulated the entire body of the nation. Just like your 43 pairs of nerves regulate the entire body and so forth. They're the connectors to everything in the entire body. And you have 42 assessors of Ma'at plus the judge makes 43 in the weighing of the heart against the feather and so forth. Now, so that's just an example of who, quote unquote, Aquarius is. You have Hapi of the South, Hapi of the North. You have Merit of the South and Merit of the North. These are divinities that communicate with their children. If you're a child of Merit of the South or Merit of the North, Merit Met or Merit Shema. If you're a child of Hapi of the South or Hapi of the North, Hapi Met or Hapi Reset and so forth, if you're a child of that divinity will communicate with you. If you're a child of that divinity, when you pour libation and give ritual offerings and engage in ritual practice, spirit possession, spirit communication happens, divination and so forth, the deity communicates with you. You being born in a certain time in January, and which is the sun is not even in that constellation, and somebody says, you're an Aquarius, and they start giving you these little attributes that has nothing to do with, can you communicate with this divinity? Was that divinity assigned to you? So when you incarnate it into the world, did that spirit come into the world with you? If that happens, then yes, you're a child of Hapi or Meri. If it did not happen, then you're not, no matter what a little tropical chart or a sidereal chart says. Now, let's go back to another one of the representations, just to give you and of course, if you have any questions in the chat room, of course, you can pull those up. Now, let me also pull up our book real quick on Odumankoma. This is one of our books that we published, and we were talking about the divinity Kepra and Keprit, but maybe Kepra and Atem. So we were showing that the deity Atem and the deity Kepra are called Odumankoma, Tredriampong, in the Akan tradition. We worship the same divinities. But we're going to talk about the beetle divinity real quick. As you can see, this beetle divinity pushing the ball of dung, he was corrupted into the crab Cancer, but originally in the original totemic representation, is the deity Khepra on the male side. So this is Khepra. Let's look at this, what the divinity represents. The first part of the book, we talk about Atem, and the second part of the book, we talk about Khepra. Okay. And we just showed this representation here. So Khepra can have the body of a male, head of the beetle, sometimes the body of the male, head of the male, and a symbol of a beetle on top of his head. Sometimes they'll make his whole head the beetle and so forth. And we're going to show why they make his head the beetle and so forth. Sometimes it's shown as a beetle pushing the sun, but this is a beetle. And the sacred animal totem for Khepra is the quote unquote dung beetle. And why is it the dung beetle? You see he's on his forelegs and he's using his hind legs to push a ball of dung that's rolling across the landscape. And just like the dung beetles do that today, they show Khepra in the form of a great dung beetle pushing the solar disk across the sky from sunrise to sunset, just like the dung beetle pushes the ball of dung across the landscape. Now, why do we do that? And we're talking about the back legs and him walking, quote unquote, backwards and so forth, facing one direction, but going backwards. That's why they use the crab that walks backwards and so forth. This is the cosmology. The scarab beetle places its eggs inside of dung, then uses its legs to roll the dung across the landscape. The new life emerges from the ball of dung. So the eggs are placed in the dung, they're being fertilized and so forth, rolls the dung across the landscape, new life emerges from the ball of dung. The spirit force that causes things to come into being is Khepra. Khepera means to come into being in the language of Kamit. He's the force that brings things into being. And so this is why he's depicted symbolically as a beetle pushing the disk of the sun across the landscape. Within the disk of the sun is the power of Ra and Ra'et, which gives birth to and enlivens all created entities. Khepra is akin to the explosive force of fire. Ra is the radiant force, effulgent, burning energy of fire. Atem is the consuming power or concretizing power of fire. Let's go up and show an image of those three. So this is Khepra with the head of the beetle, representing the sunrise. Ra as Afura, flat horn ram divinity, the radiant sun giving out all the energy, his spiritual force penetrating or possessing the sun and utilizing the sun to transmit his energy. And then Atem in the red setting sun. So you have the explosive fire that brings things into being, the radiant force, and then the red consuming fire that concretizes things and so forth and begins the sunset. Sunrise, sunset, and the full radiant sun at noon and during the day and so forth. But these are spiritual forces that penetrate, possess, and animate the sun. That's Khepra, that's Atem, this is Ra. Three different deities. This is Khepra in the boat of the sun in the morning, the sunrise. This is Atem sitting inside of a red setting sun in the evening. This is an actual image of the sun setting as a red disk in the evening and so forth. This is where this image comes from of Atem. Now, we talk about the relationship between Khepra and so forth, and we were also talking about the different function of the divinity. Just want to point out one more thing with regard to that. And we were also showing in this particular book how the same deity exists in the Akan tradition. One thing that's important, Asase Nebet Tepet and Asase Nebet Pet are the wives of Atem and Khepra. They are called Asase Afu and Asase Yan Akan. Here they are sitting next to Atem. And we just wanted to bring that out And just to show you this image, just give me 1 second. We said the female form right here of the gray beetle is Keprit. So there's a female beetle and so forth, the male beetle. We just talked about Asase Nebet Pet and so forth. She wears the beetle upon her head in certain contexts. Dung beetles are known for being able to navigate by using polarized patterns of moonlight. They have also been found to be able to use the Milky Way, the cluster of stars called the Hop or Heavenly Nile, to navigate. The only insect known to have this ability. This demonstrates their heavenly connection with the Aten, the sun, and other stars, and so forth. So we pointed that out just to show that there are, these different divinities. I just wanted to make sure to see if we had this image in this particular section. And it may not be in this section. Okay, so we'll just pull it up. Just want to show you an image really quickly of that female divinity. Okay, so this is actually the female divinity Usaset Nebipet. She is nursing the Her, so-called pharaoh Seti, in the temple of Seti in Abju and so forth, so-called Abydos. And she is also called, she's also shown as the female beetle and so forth. Now, which is Keprit. So there's a Kepra and Keprit, male and female divinities animating a certain aspect of creation. Now, you saw this is one of these amulets with the beetle and so forth. And this is also a scarab. So this is one of the jewelry pieces, of course. And you have the beetle, and in this context, the winged beetle and so forth, and the solar disk. There's also the various amulets that you find all throughout Kamit for thousands of years. On the bottom of that amulet, very often they would have chapter, quote unquote, 30 of the Runu Imheru and so forth. They would place that amulet of Kepra on the heart of the individual and so forth. But what's also important with regard to that is that when you look at the brain structure, of course, what you're looking at is the beetle. And when you look at the cerebral cortex, the two hemispheres of the cerebrum, and then you look within that and you look at the thalamus and so forth, the right side and the left side and so forth, what you'll see is that structure of Kepra and Kepri within the brain. And then you have the corpus callosum, that is the, bundle of nerves and so forth that unite both hemispheres of the brain and so forth. You have the beetle Kepra and Kepri right here in the brain. So that's their shrine in the body. The shrine in the body of Hapi and Merit are the arteries and veins. The shrine in the body of Kepra and Keprit is within the cerebral cortex. And this is why you have that representation here. Okay. Okay, just want to, there are a couple of questions. So yes, that would be quote unquote Cancer. And so they use the crab for Cancer. And as we mentioned before, so this particular, we're given an introduction here, but we have a 6-week course, parts 1 and then parts 2, and we're going to go through each one of these divinities, all 13 of them. And we have a 7-week course, which is part 1, a 6-week course is part 2. The first 7-week course that starts this Wednesday, we're going to go through the first 7 signs or deities, their cosmological functions, their shrines in the body and so forth, all of that. And then the second course, part 2, is going to deal with the final 6. So we're going to go through all 13 deities, show their functions, cosmology and creation, their relationships of the divinities, the husband and wife relationship, as well as their shrines in our bodies. Okay. Okay, so, and then Shu and Tefnut, as we'll get into some detail, they deal with the 2 lungs and so forth, and the fluid within the lungs. We're going to get into that. Okay, let's pull up another quick little, because we wouldn't have time to go through all, every one of them, but we just want to give you some of it. As a matter of fact, this is Serket, the scorpion divinity, deals with healing, powerful force, great mother divinity, and so forth. This is the origin of Scorpio. Now, and this is the water scorpion on the head. That's one of her representations, female divinity. This is from in the Valley of the Kings in Kamit and so forth. And when we go to Kamit, we will visit this, this particular tomb, and you'll see this actual image of her. We have some images of her and so forth, this particular image. Now, when we did our class on the Totems to Seneb, we went into some detail about her. And when you look at her, that's one of her representations, but then you also see her shown head of a woman, the top part body of the woman, she has a crown on and so forth, but her entire body, her trunk, is in the form of the scorpion, as you can see. But when you look at the scorpion, and then you look at the thoracic cavity, the thorax and so forth, that has to do with the breathing process and so forth, you have a scorpion sitting right here. They will show you exactly where her shrine is by showing her iconography. Just like Hapi and Merit, the rivers of blood in the body are their shrines. You look at Kepra and so forth, they show their representations in the iconography. Then they show you where they're seated in the cerebrum and deep within the cerebrum and so forth. You will find Kepra and Kepri. When you look at Serket, the great scorpion divinity, she's a divine killer, but also a healeress and so forth. They'll show it, the scorpion on her head, just to identify her from other female divinities. If you just saw her as a female divinity and you saw her on her head, the scorpion, and you saw another female divinity that looked just like her, but she had a shuttle on her head, then you can see, well, one of them is Neat and one of them is Serket. Even without reading the text, you would know who's who. But then they also have different representations. So when you look at the name Serket, it has to do with breath, it has to do with the thorax and so forth. When you get stabbed by a scorpion, one of the first things that happens is the thorax is paralyzed, and now you can't expand and contract and you can't breathe and so forth. But then when there are sacred spells for overcoming the poison of a scorpion in ancient Kemet and so forth, and you invoke the divinity, and she can get that negative energy out of you or that poison out of you and so forth, and she can expand and contract your thorax again, and then you can engage in breathing. That also has to do with breathing in the context of ritual meditation, as well as ritual dance and so forth. So if you're not, part of your invocation is not having to do with serket, if you engage in ritual meditation and so forth, or ritual breath, then there's something missing. Our people always knew that in ancient Kemet. So when we pour libation and include these different divinities, calling out these different deities, and then after we pour libation and the deities are present, then we engage in ritual, whether it's ritual song or ritual dance or ritual chant or ritual meditation, ritual incantation, ritual prayer, and so forth, then we've already invoked them, and the divinity that needs to come forward based on the practice that we're engaged in to align with them, they come forward and we fuse with them and align with them. But if you don't know anything about these divinities, and people talking about just sit down and meditate and be quiet, Serket is the scorpion in your chest right now. It's for Afuraitkaitnit people, African Black people only. When you invoke her by name, the energy of that force is stimulated. You can align with her, and then those meditations take on a different context. And of course, we're going to go into, what the thorax does, the thoracic cavity, what its function is biologically and so forth, and how that's related to the cosmology. But if somebody says, hey, you're a Scorpio, and they start talking about your, desires and, sexual activity and so forth, has nothing to do with the reality. If they're not talking about the goddess Serket, what her role in creation is, what her shrine in your body is, they don't know anything about Scorpio. All right. Let me pull up this other. Okay, so we mentioned this a little bit earlier. So, okay, so we talked about Kunuim was the great ram of the South. He's the one that fuses together the ka, the soul, and the body of the person on the divine potter's wheel and so forth. Now, and then we talked about Banebjedet, the great ram of the North. Now, let's just get a little bit of insight on that. This is a short article that where we were putting a little bit of information out on this topic. So when you look at this is the Jed pillar and so forth, Banebjedet, the great Ba, the master Neb of the Jed pillar. He's holding a symbol, a staff that has the Jed pillar on it, as well as an Ankh and the User staff and so forth. But it says during the late period, Banebjed or Banebjedet was referred to as the goat of Mendes by the Greeks, who mispronounced the phrase Banebjedet, Ram, Lord of Jedet, and named the city Mendes. So if you Google goat of Mendes or the Mendesian ram or the Mendesian goat, originally it's the ram going back tens of thousands of years, but then the whites and offspring started calling him a goat. The goat of Mendes has been linked by some esoteric scholars to Baphomet, the false god the Templars were accused of worshiping and all of that. But of course, Baphomet is a corruption of a title of Banebjedet. It has nothing to do with, the nonsense that people have to do with pseudo-esotericism. It has nothing to do with the, original Black man. It has nothing to do with the, union of male and female. That's foolishness. In fact, just so when they show these images of, an androgynous being and that famous, portrayal by Eliphas Levi of half man, half woman, goat and so forth, that's nonsense. That's a corruption of an image of Banebjedet, which is silly. They're promoting homosexuality. So if you're walking around talking about Baphomet represents our ancient culture and you getting tattoos of Baphomet, they were promoting dissexuality, homosexuality with these perverse images. Now, let me just pull up one other. just to put a cap on that, this is the divinity Hatmehit. She is the wife of Banebjedek. So it's Banebjedek, Hatmehit, and Herupakar. She's the foremost of the fish. And you'll see the fish on the head of the woman. You see the fish structure in the face of the individual. You'll see the fish on her head, which is a dolphin and so forth. And what we were showing is that this structure is called the pharynx. Biologically, she governs the pharynx. And we talk about Hat and Mehit and the cosmology of that and so forth, and how she manifests in the Akan tradition and so forth. And we talk about the difference between Mut and Aset and Hat Mehit. And that is just so you can see that. In Yoruba, Yemoja Olosa, which is the divinity of the lagoon, and Odiwa, and Akan is Epo Abena, the ocean, Fosu Aboje, which is, you know, the lagoon, and Ajawa. And then you have Mut, the great mother Mut, she governs the ocean. Hat Mehit governs the lagoons and so forth. Aset, dealing with river water. So sometimes people confuse these three divinities, and they're three different divinities. But Hat Mehit is the wife of Banebjedek. So when they talk about Banebjedek, represents the union of male and female in the divine balance, it's pure stupidity. This is his wife, a female divinity, and he's the male counterpart. But getting back to that particular and then you have Kunwemu. Kunum is depicted as a man with the head of a ram, horizontal undulating horns. This is thought to be the original Egyptian species, apparently supplanted over time by another species. Some Greek writers, ignorant of the older species, mistake the ram associated with Kunwemu or Kunum, Banebjedek, and Herishef as a goat. And hold on one second, let me make sure you can see that. Okay, this is what I was showing. And in fact, let me make sure that you were able to see. Okay, so we were showing this as Hat Mehit. She is the wife of Banebjedek. And we were just showing that, and we were showing she governs the pharynx. And we were also showing the relationship between the differences between Mut, Aset, and Hat Mehit, which is the same as Epo Abena, Fosu Aboje, and Ajawa and Akan, and Yemoja, Olosa, and Oduwa, and Yoruba, different divinities. But this is Kunem, the great, who they would call Capricorn and so forth. This is the great ram of the South. Now, somebody asked about Neat. So there's a relationship between Kunem, the great quote unquote ram of the South, misnomered the goat, or quote unquote seahorse and so forth. But that's Kunem. And then Neat, the divine weaver, as you can see here, she has the weaving shuttle on her head, but she's also shown with the bow and arrow. She's the great archeress, but she's also the divine weaver. And here she is in the middle. There's a union between Kunemu or Kunum and Neat as husband and wife. That's quote unquote Capricorn and Sagittarius. And of course, Sagittarius comes first, and then right after that comes Capricorn and so forth. But she is quote unquote Sagittarius, and he is quote unquote Capricorn. Now, you will see she is an archeress, you know, shooting out this energy and so forth. And then she's a divine weaver as well. Then we look at Kunem or Kunum. Let me show a little bit of an image. This is the ancient temple of Neat and Kunum in Esna, or Unit and so forth, as husband and wife. that's quote unquote Sagittarius and Capricorn, that's husband and wife, but it's Nit and Kunum. And in this particular article, we were just showing the relationship between how they, turned Nit into a, Athena and so forth. So here you have the divine potter. When they say you take clay on the potter's wheel, he took the soul of the person, the Ka, and the body of the person, and fused them together on the potter's wheel. That's deep within the, shrine of the body and so forth, deep within the union of the sperm and ovum and so forth, the union of the, sperm and ovum creating the zygote. You have Kunim, and his name, Okukunwemfo in Akan means potter. That's Kunim in ancient Kamit, but we say Okukunwem in Akan, same name, same function. So you look in the Akan language today and they say, what do you call a potter? They say Okukunwemfo, one of the group of people, fo, who engage the Okukunwem process, the potter process. It's the same Kunim in ancient Kamit. So when you look at the spelling of the name of Kunim, his little pot is representative of his name, the Kunim pot, the little water pot and so forth. But he's the one who unites or knits together the soul and the body and so forth. And they also talk about Kunim as the one who opens the boat and lets the water of the river Nile flow, and it begins to flood the entire country. So he has the pot of water, he opens the boat for the doors fly open, and the water comes from the south and flows up north and floods the entire country for a number of months along the banks of the river and so forth. And when the water recedes, then there's black silt that has been deposited on the banks of the river, and then people go out and plant because it doesn't really rain in ancient Kemet. So they're dependent on the flooding of the river. Kunim has his pot, the Kunim pot. That's how his name is spelled, with the Kunim pot and so forth. And he releases water from his great pot and the river floods. Kunim governs the prostate. It is the organ that releases the seminal fluid so that, fertilization can take place. And then you have Nit. Let's go back up to Nit. And Nit governs the female prostate, which are called the skin glands. And Nit facilitates the process whereby the egg is released and so forth, where she participates in the process, just like you have the prostate that releases the seminal fluid, the skin glands releases the fluid of the female and so forth. Once the sperm and ovum unite and Kunum binds them together on his divine potter's wheel, then Nit, as the great weaver, she braids together the mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosomal DNA. She braids together the sperm and ovum and fuses them together. So Kunim, her husband, fuses the soul and body together, and he fuses together the sperm and ovum. And once they're fused together, then the genetic material is woven by his wife, Nit. She is the weaver of ethereal matter. She's the wave energy within the great divine water of Mut, just like the goddess Nut is the wave energy within the black substance of space. But Nit is the wave energy within the divine water and so forth that governs all of creation. So if people are talking about, I'm a Sagittarius, but they've never invoked the deity Nit, who's the great archeress. She releases the fluid and so forth and helps to release and shoot out the egg. And once the egg is united with the sperm, after she shoots with her arrows and shoots it out, of course, it's shot out of the ovaries and so forth, goes into the fallopian tube, the sperm meets it, there's a fusion together, Kunum facilitates the fusion, and then once it's fused, she goes from being the archeress, the one who shoots the egg out, she turns into the weaver, and this is the weaving shuttle on her head, and she braids together the genetic material. She's a great mother divinity. She's the wave energy within water, the conductive energy of water, and the black substance of space, the goddess Nunet. and as well as Nut, who governs, you see her body bent over the earth and so forth, and the stars within her body and so forth. The wave energy within the black substance of space is Nunet. The wave energy within water is Neat. She's the archeress and the weaver. She shoots out the genetic material, helps to shoot out the egg, and then braids it or weaves it together with the genetic material of the sperm. That's how Neat and Khnum, as husband and wife, and that's their temple in Esna, the temple of Neat and Khunem. As husband and wife, they work together in the body. He's governing the prostate gland. He opens the vessel and releases the fluid, just like he opens the gate and releases the flood of the Nile River that fertilizes the land. He releases the prostate, the seminal fluid comes out and fertilizes the woman and so forth. And once that fertilization occurs, then Neat can braid together the thing. This is Kunwimu and Neat. If somebody says I'm a Capricorn, they don't know anything about Kunwimu. They've never invoked him. They don't know his function in creation and so forth. All of these divinities exist in the various traditions, Yoruba, Akan, Vodun, within their own languages. So everybody knows about them in their own languages. So we've always invoked them naturally, named after them and so forth in our own languages. But if you don't know who these deities are, say, hey, I'm a Capricorn because I was born on this day. And then they give you a few little attributes. Inaccurate. Okay. Okay, yes. Question in the chat room. We will have, we are going to post this up. And again, this is just a short introduction, but we're going to spend, each course, we have the part 1 that's starting on Wednesday. It's a 7-week course. We'll deal with the first 7 deities of these signs of the zodiac. And then that starts on February 8th, and it'll go through for 7 weeks. And then we'll do part 2 and finish up with the final 6 divinities. So we're going to go through all 13 deities, their cosmology in detail. We're just touching on a few of them today, but we're going to spend the entire, 1.5 hour, 2-hour session on each divinity in this upcoming course. You can sign up for that now. Let me just show that for the people. I see somebody said they have to check out. They just want to know if the replay of this will be up. We are going to post this on YouTube, but let me just show you, because actually we're almost done. We had to start a little bit late because of Zoom, but if you look on our Akongwasuya page on the website, when you scroll down, you will see the AKYENEBOA flyer. Excuse me. So you'll see the AKYENEBOA part 1 starts this Awukuda Wednesday, February 8th, 7 sessions for the first 7 deities. Then part 2 starts after that, and the final 6 deities. Our classes are always $5 a week. So the first class is $35, $5 a week, 7 weeks, $35. Second class is 6 weeks, it's $30. But if you order both at the same time, you get a discount. You can order parts 1 and part 2, at one time. Just we have a section for that. And instead of paying 35 and 30, which is 65, you can pay 44, and you'll see that right here. Click on the pull down menu, you'll see the parts 1 and 2 together, which is 42. Or if you just wanted to take part 1 now and wait and purchase part 2 when we get to part 2, you could do that as well. Okay. But yes, we will be posting this up afterwards. Okay, so we're just going to go through, we're going to touch on just a couple more, 1 or 2 more. We'll just touch on a couple of summary points for them, and then we'll be done. So for example, when you look at Ma'at, the female divinity of divine law and balance, the scales of Ma'at, regulating divine balance and so forth. Let's look at the biological piece for that so you can understand that piece. Hold on a second. So in ancient Kamit, you have the dual hall of Ma'at called Usek Ma'ati. Now you'll see that there's a dual hall of Ma'at, and you have deities sitting in judgment, and you have the 42 assessors of Ma'at, 42 divinities as we talked about. This is a portion of that papyrus, and some of these 42 divinities are sitting there. So when you transition, your spirit goes before the Abosom, the divinities and so forth, to see if you live in harmony with divine order. Your heart is balanced against the feather. You're in the dual hall of Ma'at. And if your heart balances out the feather, if your heart is not weighed down by disorder, lust, and so forth, it balances out the feather. And then you pass that test and you're allowed to dwell with a spiritually cultivated community of ancestresses and ancestors while you await incarnation in the future. You also have to go through an extensive interrogatory with the male deity, Ma'at. And let's just show that real quick so you can have an idea about that. So we did an entire broadcast dealing with, or an entire 6-week course, as a matter of fact, dealing with on one hand, the 42 assessors of Ma'at, these 42 divinities. As we said, there are 42 deities that govern, the 42 nomes of Kamit, but also plus the judge right here, which makes 43. Those are the 43 pairs of nerves in the body that regulate order in your entire body. The body of you, just like the body of the community or the body of the nation, is regulated by 43 divinities. So we did a course on that and showed how the 43 pairs of nerves are governed by these 43 divinities. So we show that in that course. But we also did a course on the male deity of divine law, Ma'at, the male deity of divine law. He's the counterpart of Ma'at. So that's important. But in that particular papyrus, it shows the dual hall of Ma'at, heart being weighed against the feather. We show Ma'at means sight or vision and so forth. It also means to be true, real, upright, balanced. This is the male deity Ma'at. He's found in the 11th hour of the Duat, in the Runu Pert Imheru, so-called Book of the Dead and so forth, Book of Coming Forth. Many people don't know about the male deity Ma'at because Europeans don't focus on him, so then we don't. But when we went to Kamit and we were in the tomb of Ramessu VI, we have an image of, more than one image of the deity Ma'at from different papyri in Kamit. When we were in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, numerous different papyri. You can go to different tombs in the Valley of the Kings and see the male deity Ma'at on the wall and so forth. We have images of him and so forth. So, but he's the counterpart of Ma'at. Now, without going through too much, basically what we're showing is when they show the symbol of the eye for Ma'at, or the sickle, which is a farming tool that discriminates or cuts or separates and so forth, just like your eyes, distinguish, discriminate, separate, analyze and so forth. So the term Ma'at, meaning sight, vision, something seen, what is true, what is real, what is actual, what is seen, what is, veritable and so forth. And Ma'at meaning true, truthful, veritable, real, actual, but also balance and everything else. What we were showing in this particular text We'll just go up right here. The vestibular system in both the sides, both parts of the inner ear. That fluid there in the inner ear is the balancing system. These two ear canals lead to the vestibular system, the center of balance in the head region. These are the Usek Ma'ati, the dual hall of Ma'at. The canal is the hall that leads to the shrine, the vestibular system, the balancing system in both inner ears and so forth. That is the shrine of Ma'an Ma'at in the head region. So if you're leaning this way, if you're falling asleep and you wake up and you balance yourself, or you stand on one leg and you start tipping, but then you are able to send that energy to the inner ear, to the hall of Ma'at, the center of balance, and you can balance yourself out. That is the physical shrine of Ma'an Ma'at. These are the two halls of Ma'at and so forth in the head region. And then, of course, you see the other way Ma'at is spelled is the sickle with the elevation of earth. From the neck down, the trunk region is like the earthly region. The head is the heavenly region. The neck is the gateway between heaven and earth. In the earthly region of the trunk of the body, your center of gravity between your navel and your back and so forth, that is the shrine of Ma'an Ma'at, of balance. In your earthly region, the trunk region, the center of gravity, the vestibular system in the heavenly region in the head is the dual hall of Ma'at inside the quote unquote heavenly region. So let me just pull up one more. Okay. And we'll finish off with that. So back in November, we were in Philadelphia and we were teaching. We were doing a workshop. This is Ma'at, one of the many, images of the divinity, Ma'at and so forth. Male, female force of divine law and balance and creation. And this is the image that when we were in the tomb of Ra-Mesu the sixth, misnomer Ramses the sixth, but Ra-Mesu the sixth, in the Valley of the Kings and so forth. This is an image of Ma'al. You see the sickle and the plinth, the elevation of earth that we just saw, and then the papyrus roll and so forth, which is the determinative that's not pronounced, but that's Ma'al. And he is in the 11th hour of the Duat. So Ma'al, God of law, order, truth, integrity. When you look in, this is from Budge's dictionary, and you see U220, P400, M571, N1178. This is the pyramid text of Unas, utterance 220. The pyramid text of the quote unquote Pharaoh of Pe'ah, Pepi the first, utterance 400. The pyramid text of Mer in Ra, utterance 571. The pyramid text of Nefer Ka-Ra, who was Pepi the second, utterance 1178. These are different areas where references, when you go to those texts, those pyramids, and look at the text of those different pyramids of those different kings that lived in different times, you will find the deity Ma'al spoken about. You'll also find him in the 11th hour of the Duat. So when I was in the tomb of Ra-Mesu the sixth, they have the book of the Duat on the walls. Of course, there are papyri. Hold on a second. Of course, there are papyri, that have the Sha'im Duat, the book of what is in the Duat of the underworld and so forth. But when you go into the tombs, they have the entire text written along the walls. So I was looking at the text along the walls. I looked for the 11th hour. Once I found the 11th hour, I started looking in the 11th hour. And of course, Ma'al is in the 11th hour. And when you can look at various tombs, and as we said, also in various papyri, when we go to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, various papyri from different times in Kamit that's separated by thousands of years, and you look in the 11th hour of the Duat in the text, you'll find the deity Ma'at. So if someone is talking about they're a Libra, but they've never invoked the female divinity Ma'at, she's never possessed them or communicated with them via divination, they've never invoked the male divinity, they haven't invoked Ma'at or the male divinity Ma'at. And they're, by the way, in Yoruba, they're called the Ibeji and so forth, the male and female twin divinities that regulate polar and complementary balance in creation. And Akan is Amma, Ria, and Amma Su, which is Ma'at and Ma'ah and so forth. But if someone says they're a Libra, but they don't know anything about the male divinity Ma'ah, the female divinity Ma'at, then they don't know anything about quote unquote Libra. So, all right. Okay, so that is 10:01. So we're gonna go ahead and end it here. We just wanted to touch on these cosmological principles, showing that the various divinities that exist, they govern different aspects of creation. Each one of them have shrines in the body. When we invoke these divinities, when we stimulate their shrines in our bodies through ritual invocation and so forth, whether it's ritual song, ritual dance, ritual chant, prayer, libation, ritual offering, whatever we're engaged in and so forth, then we invoke the divinity. We can communicate directly with them. Spirit possession or spirit communication in different forms happens. When certain Abosom, Orisha, Vodou, Toru are assigned to us pre-incarnation, we come into the world with these spirits that are connected to our spiri-genetic blood circles, and then we have a relationship with them. Just looking up at a chart written by Europeans and saying, hey, I'm a Sagittarius, hey, I'm a Scorpio, hey, I'm this, hey, I'm that, and this is what determines my life, that doesn't determine your life. The deity that governs your head, that incarnated into the world with you, the spiritual force you can communicate with, that divinity, as well as your patriclan and matriclan divinity, and everybody has a name for that in different traditions. No matter where we are in Afuraitkaitnit, Africa, or wherever Black people are in the world, there's a divinity that governs. The sperm cell was animated by a force, a patriclan, Abosom, or deity that has governed your patriclan ancestresses and ancestors for thousands of years. The ovum cell that went into your makeup was animated by a feminine force, a matriclan, Abosom, a matriclan divinity that has governed your matriclan ancestresses and ancestors for thousands of years. When those two energies combine, just like the ovum and sperm combine and the genetic material from your mother and from your father combine to create a unique entity, which is your physical body, where the energy of the matriclan and patriclan divinity unites to create a unique spiritual configuration of energy that you draw from, all governed by the deity that governs your head. Those three divinities, head, matriclan, and patriclan, like a triangle, ahinasa, govern your functioning in the world. And we're sent into the world on certain days and certain times of the year and so forth that are governed by specific divinities as an indication of who we were assigned to pre-incarnation before we came into the womb. So if someone's born on a certain day and they have dates that were written by Europeans that don't really align with the actual constellations, that have nothing to do with the actual deities, whose energy are animating this configuration of stars that give out a certain energy construct and so forth, if you're not aligned with that, then the astrology is misinformed and misguided. Instead of imitating what Europeans put forward, what does our culture have to say about these constellations? Shu and Tefnut are male and female twin force. It's not Castor and Pollux. Can you invoke Shu, a male divinity? Can you invoke Tefnut? If you're children of them, if you're governed by them, you can. If you're not, and you're running around saying, I'm a Gemini, and you're actually born under the divinity Ptah, Taurus, quote unquote Taurus, but the deity Ptah, the one that governs, you know, the limbic system in the brain and so forth, and you're trying to invoke Shu and Tefnut, the Gemini, because you have false dates given to you by a tropical calendar, you're totally off base. So we're going to get into all of that in the upcoming course. So this is the AKYENEBOA course, and it starts this Wednesday, February 8th, part 1, and then part 2 is coming as well. So if anybody has any questions, of course, you can post them in the chat room. We're going to go ahead and end it here. We're already at 2 hours. Didn't want to keep you too long. Okay. Oh, one other thing. We've been mentioning this throughout the class, but we have 2 upcoming tours. I'm sorry, let me pull this over here. Okay, so we have our spring tour to Kamit, May 23rd to May 31st. We still have some openings for that. Cosmology of Creation will be going to 12 cities from northern Kamit all the way through into Nubia, Khanit, Nubit, so-called Nubia, Abosom, and so forth. You see this in the background is actually the Temple of Ramessu and the Temple of Nefertari, and Abosom will be visiting 12 cities, 13 sites in 12 different cities from northern Kamit all the way through to southern Kamit and into Khanit, into Nubia, Nubit, May 23rd through May 31st. We still have some spots left open for that. For those who cannot make that one, we also have our autumn tour. It's the same tour, but we're just going to do it in autumn for people who can't make it in the spring, September 26th through October 4th. So we have payment plans for both. You can see that on the site, the Awukuda page on the site. And we have like 13 different videos of mainly of our most recent tour, some from the previous year, but this recent tour from last May, we took some videos from different cities, different tombs, different temples, different shrines, and so forth that we went to just to show you the places that you will be experiencing and different things that you will see on the tour. So you can check that out on the Awukuda page. Okay. Okay. So, I say everybody for tuning in. If you have any questions, of course, send us a message. And hold on 1 second, let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. Okay. So I say we thank you for tuning in. This will be posted on our YouTube page once everything uploads and processes and so forth. So at some point later tonight or early in the morning, it will be ready. And if you have any questions, just let us know. But I say we thank you once again for tuning in. And we will meet again. That's it.